Hello, welcome to Zinterp Technology Training. I'm your host, Steven Zeiler. If you know me, then you know that over the past few years, I've become increasingly obsessed with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and how they are revolutionizing the world financial sector as we speak. And you also know that I'm a big proponent of web technologies like Ruby on Rails and Node.js. Today I want to demonstrate how to build a shopping cart payment application using Bitcoin to accept payments. And we'll be using BitPay, one of the world's largest Bitcoin payment providers, to generate invoices for us and to process the payments. The first thing to do to get started with our BitPay payment app is to go to bitpay.com, where you will need to sign up for a BitPay account and provide your real identity information. Once you have a BitPay account, log in, and we want to go to the API developer portal. We do that by clicking up here at API, and then in order for our program to access our account on BitPay programmatically, we need an API access key. We'll use the key in all of our API calls to access BitPay servers. This account has no API keys created, so I will add a new API key. Okay, and I'll title this one BitPay Tutorial. Okay, now that I have an API key, I can use it in my application. And don't try to steal this key because I will be deleting it immediately after this tutorial. Don't worry. Once you have your API key, it's time to learn a little bit about the BitPay API itself. If you go to bitpay.com/download/bitpayapi.pdf, you will find their complete documentation. This is the official documentation. Like we said, activating the API access. And basically what the BitPay service does is allow us to generate invoices that we can use to fund our accounts. And we can tie these invoices using their unique IDs to a certain shopping cart or a certain payment within our application. It's very easy to create an invoice. You post a message to bitpay.com/API/invoice with your credentials and the required parameters such as price and currency. We'll be using BTC for the currency. Since we'll be using Node.js to launch our payment application server, I'm going to use the Node.js BitPay client API that I created. If you want to check it out, it's available on NPM and also on GitHub at github.com/stevenzeiler/bitpay-node. The BitPay node client library allows you to create a client with your access key, your API key that you created earlier, and then make calls on behalf of your account using that key. It's very simple. Once you've installed BitPay node with npm node package manager, you just say require BitPay, and then you create a new BitPay client, passing in your API key. Here I use the process environment variable to mask what the API key is. And then it's very straightforward to create an invoice. An invoice only requires price and currency. And so we call client.createInvoice with price and currency, our options, and that will generate an invoice on BitPay servers that we can visit. The response JSON, as per the documentation, will give us a unique ID that we can later use to map a payment to a specific checkout or an order from our users. And we also get a URL that allows our users to pay BitPay at this URL. For instance, this example URL, well, it's expired, but here is a BitPay invoice. Next, I'll show you how to generate a real invoice. I'll open up a terminal on my computer, and since I already have Node.js and npm installed, I can say npm install BitPay node. That will install the package for me from the npm servers, and you can do this too, it's very easy. And then I'm going to start up a Node.js REPL, and I'm going to do exactly what I did before, and say BitPay equals require BitPay node, Great. Now that I have my BitPay object, I can say client equals new BitPay.client. And into that, I want to pass my API key. So I'll get my API key, and I'm going to go copy that over from the BitPay website. Okay, now that I have an API key, I can probably make an invoice. My next step is to call client.createInvoice. And into that, I will pass the price, which I'm going to make quite small, 1/1000th of a Bitcoin, and the currency, BTC. And to this function, it's asynchronous, so I'll pass a callback function, which will just log our invoice. All right, so you see that we've created a new invoice for 1/1000th of a Bitcoin, and if everything worked right, this URL on BitPay will be a real invoice. Great, I can actually pay this invoice right now, and BitPay will show in my account that it's been marked as paid. And there's an actual Bitcoin address that I can send to. Okay, now that we know how the Node.js client library for BitPay works, we need to generate a Node.js application to listen for payment confirmations about when someone pays one of our invoices. If you look at the BitPay API documentation, after the invoice section, there's a section on receiving invoice status updates. In an invoice, you can specify an email address to receive updates whenever an invoice is paid, or you can add a notification URL, and BitPay will post back to your notification URL telling you that someone's fulfilled the invoice you've generated. That's what we want to implement in our application to make our shopping cart completely programmatic. Okay, so it says in the documentation that when you create an invoice, you pass in the notification URL option. Let's try that out. I'm going to be using Yeoman to generate an Express application. Yeoman is very easy. It's npm install yo, Y-O, and then you can use yo express to generate a new Express application. First, I'm going to make a new directory, BitPay tutorial, and then I'm going to enter the BitPay tutorial directory, and I'm going to create our new Express application using Yeoman. Basic, it'll ask you one option, basic or MVC. And MVC includes a connection to a MongoDB instance for a database, backend database. But I don't want to use MongoDB, and right now I'm just going to show off the basic. While it's generating, I'll show you the files it creates. It creates a package.json, which every Node.js application needs. It creates routes, which we'll create a new route for handling payment notifications from BitPay. And it creates app.js, which is our main server file, and that's where we will be starting. So I'm going to open up app.js, and let's have a look around. It's a pretty short file, and if you look at the bottom is where we actually create our server, http.createServer, and where we define the URLs that this server will handle. It's right above that. In Express, we call app.get or app.post to create a new route. And so I'm going to create app.post payments, and I want each payment to have its own unique ID so that I can make sure that no one's spoofing the callbacks from BitPay. And I'm going to create a new controller called payments and a controller action called notification. And I'll explain what this controller exactly is in a second. So if you look at the top, we require this routes file, and we require route/user, which is the default generated endpoint for getting users. If we take a look at route/user, we see that the user function list performs a standard express route function with the request object and the response object, and then it just sends respond with a resource. When BitPay comes in, we want to do something with their notification JSON, and then respond with a success status to BitPay that yes, we received the notification, and they don't need to continue sending us notifications. I want to create a new route, so I'm going to copy our user route, and I'm going to create payments, and then I'm going to open up the payments route, and remember we have an action that we want to define as notification. This will be post to payments notification callbacks. And then our request is going to come in from BitPay, and it's going to have a body which has all the JSON that we're interested in. So I'm going to just, for now, console.log that body. And then finally, I'm going to send a 200 status back to BitPay's server saying that we agree that we accepted the payment. If BitPay doesn't receive a 200 status, they will continually send requests to our server until we do respond. And I think that is like an exponential decay where over time we'll get less and less responses, and if we never respond, then BitPay might cut us off and say that our system's not working. So it's important to respond promptly when we receive a notification. Okay, now if we go back to our app.js, I'm going to remove the users route, and in fact I'm going to just remove the users file also. Okay. Now we have our basic application up. I'm going to, as I do in all of my projects, and you should too, initialize a Git repository. Git is our source code manager. Once I have that, I want to quickly create a git ignore file because I want to ignore the node modules directory so that we don't include node modules in our Git repository. If I look at the status, I have a bunch of new files that were generated by Yeoman. I'm going to go ahead and add all the files. Look at the status again. Now these are ready to commit. I'm going to say git commit. In this commit message, we generate an Express app using Yeoman. And we also added a route for payments. Great. Now that I've committed that into Git, I can create a Heroku application to which we will deploy our server. That is very easy. Once you have installed the Heroku tool belt, say git Heroku create BitPay tutorial, if the name's not already taken. Okay, because I already have a Git repository, this has added Heroku's repository to as a remote in my repo. So now I can say git push Heroku master, and this will push my repository up to Heroku. While it's doing that, we also want to add SSL support. SSL allows encrypted communication to our endpoint, and BitPay servers require that we use SSL. So, take a look at Heroku's documentation for SSL. If you go to devcenter.heroku.com/articles/ssl-endpoint, it will walk you through using OpenSSL to generate a certificate. But for this development environment and this staging environment, we can just use a self-signed certificate. And we don't need to generate one and have it signed by a authority figure. In order to get started with SSL and enable it, we need to add the add-on Heroku provides, which is called SSL endpoint. To do that, we say Heroku add-ons add SSL endpoint. It says the next step is to add our certificates, but it might be enough if we want to just visit our application. To use it without SSL. And there is a problem, so I'm going to show you how to use the Heroku logs to look at our server logs and see what's wrong. Of course, if I look at my app.js, I forgot to remove the require user, even though I removed the user. So I'm going to go ahead and add that, and I'm going to commit it. And this was a bug. I'm going to say remove require for user router. And then I can push this to Heroku, and it should be working after that. Great. Now that we have deployed our application to Heroku and set up the SSL endpoint add-on, we can visit it at https bitpaytutorial.herokuapp.com. To test out our payment callback URL, we'll do a post request to payments/some arbitrary ID. And to do that from the command line is really easy. We do curl x post, and we'll paste in our URL. Remember, our callback is payments and then an ID number. And this should return a 200 OK response. Great. You can see that our server is responding to HTTPS at this URL. So now we should be able to pass in this to an invoice generated on BitPay. And BitPay will then send us notification status updates about that invoice when we pay it. Okay. In order to actually see this in action, I'm going to look at the logs on Heroku in real time. To do that, we can say Heroku logs -t, or flag t, which means tail, and that will just continually write out the logs to our terminal window here. For instance, if I do another post request, we can see that show up in our logs, post payments/5. Great. Now it's time to generate an invoice from BitPay. If we look at the BitPay documentation, there are a few optional URL fields or post fields that we can use. Notification URL is definitely the most important one for this task. We'll specify the URL, and I'm going to also specify full notifications so that we can see all the different types of notifications that come in. BitPay sends either, if you're using full notifications, it will send a bunch of different notifications. If you're not using full notifications, it will only send you an update when the payment is totally, fully confirmed. In the Bitcoin world, sometimes people accept payments when they've not been officially totally confirmed by 6 blocks. And we can actually get immediate confirmation if we say our transaction speed is high. So I'm going to set the notification URL and full notifications and transaction speed as high, just to demonstrate this today. Okay, let's go back to our console and just fire up Node again. Remember, we will be requiring BitPay, and I want to use the BitPay API key from my environment in order to access my BitPay account. We'll pass this environment variable into Heroku in a minute. In order to do that locally, I want to say export BitPay API key equals, and then my API key, which I can get from BitPay's website. There. There's my BitPay API key, and now that will be available in my environment when I run Node. If we take a look at the process.environment.BitPay API key, it should show our key. Wonderful. Now that we have the key set up, I'm going to go ahead and copy over the setup for the client. And if we look at our client, we've got our API key in there. Great. Now, I want to pass a few more options into my invoice options, but I'm going to start with simple price and currency. But I also want to set some more options. Notification URL is very important right now. So I'm going to set the notification URL to my callback URL that I used before. So that's going to be https bitpaytutorial.heroku, and then payments, and for this I'll just say 9999. It's arbitrary. I want to specify a real unique URL at some point in production, but this is fine for now. And then other options, I want to specify transaction speed, I'm going to say this is high, and finally full notifications, I'm going to say true. So take a look at all of our options for this invoice. Great. Now I'm going to just call create invoice with these options, and that should log my invoice. Okay. Now I want to actually fund this invoice. So I'm going to go check it out. 1/1000th of a Bitcoin, and I can pay by copying this address. I'm going to use my blockchain.info account. I'll log into my wallet, my web wallet on blockchain.info. Let's see, log in. All right, there we go. And now I'm going to send money to fund the invoice. We're looking at our invoice here. I'll send 1/1000th of a Bitcoin. Is that right? Yes. Great. Sending payment. Okay, now we can monitor our transaction callbacks from BitPay to see if they actually receive this payment. We can look at the BitPay page, and it should update whenever they first receive some kind of notification about this payment. All right, this invoice has been paid. Now we should expect a callback to our server. According to the website on BitPay, all payments will take about an hour to process, so you have to wait a little bit. But once it's processed, you have the funds, and they can't be revoked.